Welcome back to the Book Club. I'm Michael Knowles. This month we will be discussing Civilization and Its Discontents by Sigmund Freud. But first, in our fast-paced world, it is tough to make reading a priority. At least it used to be. At thinker.org, they summarize the key ideas from new and noteworthy nonfiction. They give you access to an entire library of great books in bite-sized form. You can read or listen to hundreds of titles in a matter of minutes, from old classics like Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People to recent bestsellers such as Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. If you want to, let's say, challenge your preconceptions. I don't in particular, but maybe you do. You could do that. If you want to expand your horizons, again, Or if you, and I think this is a seller, want to sound smart at cocktail parties, then you've got to go check out Thinker. That is THINKR.org. No E. We don't have time for an E. Start your free trial. Put your mind in motion. We will be putting our minds in motion. I know very little about Freud. I know, of course, that a Freudian slip is where you say one thing and mean your mother, but I know little else. So we have invited Dr. Stephen Marmer, a clinical professor of psychiatry at UCLA and a practicing clinical psychiatrist here in Southern California. Steve, thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
Now, Steve, I have just read Freud for the first time. I have fallen into the oceanic feeling that Freud is describing. I'm swimming in all of these new ideas. Can you summarize the book in 1 minute?
That's like, can I summarize Proust in 1 minute? The first thing that I want to say, though, before summarizing it is, don't believe anything in the secondary sources. You must tangle with Freud in his own words. He was an amazing writer. Don't even take my word for it. Go read it yourself. Now, the gist of this book is, how do people come together to master their aggressions, their desires, their lusts, in such a way as to be able to get along, be productive, live in harmony, and maximize the amount of happiness they have and minimize the amount of unhappiness they have. And the answer is, you can't do it without paying a price, because there's always a tension arc between your gratification and the restraint that you have to exercise in order for civilization to exist. And in this sense, Freud is very unsentimental, very anti-utopian, and that's a lot of why in the modern world, many people don't like Freud, because they would rather think that everybody is good and everything is going to turn out great and we can achieve utopia. And Freud says, no, this is a perpetual struggle and a perpetual balancing act.
Between love and the death drive.
Between the love and the death drive, and our need to direct, redirect, and restrain each one of them so that our safety and our harmony require that we give up some of our happiness. And so we're ticked off because we don't want to restrict our happiness and we don't want to restrict our aggression. But we have to in order for civilization to exist. Civilization brings happiness, but it also brings unhappiness.
So he's presenting not here's the simple solution, 5 bullet points on a napkin, follow what I say and everything will be great. He is presenting these eternal problems, these compromises that we're going to have to find as we individuals try to come into civilization. And he presents a sort of paradox, which is, as you say, we don't start out in civilization. We start out in some kind of pre-civilizational hodgepodge of people. We come together and create civilization to make ourselves happier. And in a sense, it does make us happier. But then in the suppression of our desires and our instincts, we become unhappier and we develop neuroses, which is why all of us in civilization are complaining all the time.
That is absolutely correct.
So why did we start the civilization in the first place?
We needed to do it for safety, because there's people working together as a much more productive way of living than people not working together. If we don't have civilization, then whoever is the strongest person and the most dominant person at the moment will get their way or they'll kill you. It's kind of similar to Hobbes's state of nature. So we band together and we create certain sense of justice and certain sense of rules, and we could call it law and order, to restrain people, to restrain their regression and to restrain their greed and to restrain their pursuit of happiness. Because maybe I want your wife, or maybe I want your house, and it'll make me happy to do that. But if I do that, then you're going to come back and you're going to retaliate against me, or I'm going to make you unhappy. And so we have to create structures internally in our own minds in the form of conscience, and externally in terms of law and custom, to restrain people from doing exactly what they want to do, so that there's an eternal tension between personal gratification and the advancement of civilization. And if either one is turned up too high, you're going to be unhappy.
Now, this question of conscience is the part of the book that I was most interested in, sort of like someone impersonating a Freudian. Interesting, very, very interesting. That's what I kept going back to. Freud says at the end, the sense of guilt is the most important problem in the development of civilization, and we see the price that we pay for our advance in civilization is a loss of happiness through the heightening of the sense of guilt. And we call the sense of guilt, if we have a wrong desire, or a sense of remorse if we've committed an action that we would call sinful. This comes to us by way of our conscience. Freud is a committed, firm, diehard atheist. I am a Catholic. So when I read this, I think, well, it's true. We have a conscience. We have a guilt. I'm Catholic, so I love guilt. I think guilt is great. We need more of it.
I'm Jewish.
Very similar.
We're teammates.
Yes. So is it, when I read that, I thought, is Freud kind of putting the cart before the horse here? Is conscience something that we just develop as a kind of personal protection against this or that threat that comes to us from society? Or is conscience just a way, and he even describes it as something kind of outside of our, it feels like it's outside of ourselves. Is conscience just a way to measure an objective moral reality? And is guilt in that way sort of a good thing to put us back on the right path?
He would say that guilt comes from disappointing the father and maybe incurring the father's wrath. And of course, we smile because isn't that what we think about God?
Right.
Isn't God the father of all fathers?
Yeah.
And so that's a fascinating thing about why he's an atheist. I don't know whether he's an atheist because he was oppressed by the Catholicism of Vienna and the anti-Semitism of Vienna during his lifetime, or because in many, many ways, his psychology is very, very Jewish. And so it's a whole other subject to talk about his atheism.
And even his biography, in that he had this father who was much older than his mother. Freud's mother, I think, was Freud's father's third wife.
Yes.
Freud had nephews that were older than him, I
Yes,
believe.
he
So,
did.
right. I mean, it was so as long as he's saying that all these early childhood experiences have strong effect on the rest of your life, one could ask lots of questions about Freud's biography.
But Freud was quite learned, and his father gave him as a gift a copy of a very famous edition of the Bible called the Philipson Bible, and wrote a Hebrew acrostic using Freud's Hebrew name. So I believe that Freud was much more knowledgeable about Judaism and about religion than he wanted to let on, and kind of hid his sense of Judaism and his own kind of covert religious beliefs from the public. But that's that's an interesting subject. The guilt thing comes from not wanting to disappoint or arouse the retaliation of the primal father. So we develop a sense of guilt as a way of restraining our aggression and restraining our lust and our desires so that we get along better and don't provoke other people to retaliate against us. But at the same time, the ferocity with which we exert that guilt can sometimes cause neurosis and can sometimes actually cause destruction to other people. If you feel that somebody else is doing something wrong, you can attack them with a ferocity that is amazing. and that has to be restrained.
Now, in this description of neurosis and guilt, Freud seems to suggest that we need to blow off a little steam every now and again, that civilization causes us to repress some of our desires, and this makes us unhappy. And so we would like to pursue those desires at some time, be they sexual or be they aggressive or anywhere in between. This seems to me to run counter to the classical account of the mind and virtue, which is that actually repressing disordered desires and vice, say, and pursuing and practicing virtue, it's not that it makes us unhappy. It actually it might make us unhappy in the short term, but in the long run, it will make us happier. The sort of Aristotelian idea that the more we practice virtue, the easier it will be, and the easier it will be to avoid vice. Do you think it's fair to say that Freud is reacting against that he's turning that on its head?
I think that Freud would say that it only works if you can discharge your aggression and discharge your libido through sublimation. That if you don't have an outlet of one kind or another, then you're going to become neurotic. So yes, be virtuous by virtue of creating beauty or doing good for other people or productive work.
Yeah.
He is once said that happiness comes from the combination of love and work. And so if you don't have sublimation of your drives, you're going to be a miserable person. You can't just bottle it up.
And this point on work that you raise is so striking too. When he writes about work in Civilization and Its Discontents, it seems to turn on its head the modern American view of work, which is we work so that one day we can retire and not have to work anymore.
He feels the opposite. He feels that work works to the extent that you get satisfaction out of it and to the extent that it gives you a healthy outlet for your aggression and a healthy outlet for your libido. The more you enjoy your work, the more it enhances your sense of well-being. To be a good worker, the better off you're going to be and the more stable and less neurotic you're going to be.
And then the other word that you had just mentioned is love. And this is early on in the book. Freud mentions that love is this weird circumstance where we lose sense of ourselves as discrete units. That in love, we unite ourselves with the object of our love and we say all sorts of weird things like, you and I are one. You and I are united somehow. What is it about love that causes us to lose the very boundaries of ourself?
Love is a kind of temporary insanity if it's that intense, and romantic love especially, and sexual romantic love, we do almost become one when we are involved in lovemaking. We are as close to merging our bodies as is physiologically possible. And this same kind of love also suffuses a lot of the Eastern religions, where we feel at one with the universe. When we feel that we are at one with everyone else, we have pure love, no aggression, and we feel secure. However, that's unsustainable. There's no way that you can maintain that kind of love and still get along in the world. First of all, it makes you vulnerable. What if the person you love dies? Then or rejects you. That's excruciatingly painful. And secondly, you can't love everyone equally. As a matter of fact, he has a very entertaining thing about why it's impossible to love your neighbor as yourself, because your neighbor might not be a very nice person. In fact, he may want to really hurt you, and he might not be worthy of your love. And probably he thinks the same of you. And why would you want to dilute the meaning of love through inflation by loving 2 billion people when really it's only the people that you're really close to that you want to love? So again, there's a tension arc. You want to spread love to a wider circle, including friends and associates and so forth. But if you spread it to the entire world, then you're diluting it into something meaningless.
What does Freud think about good and bad and right and wrong? Or does he even think about that? And is it really just more about our desires and how we can all kind of get along in this love and death-filled joke of a world?
Good is that which is productive and enhances people's ability to cooperate with one another, to form bonds and ties without being excessively destructive, and without losing entirely your sense of self. And bad is when destruction dominates and you are unreasonable in the exercise of your aggression. So I do think that he has a good and bad. We might also say that it's good when you're in alignment, when the forces within you are in alignment. There's a saying in psychoanalysis, the ego or the self serves three harsh masters: the superego or your conscience, which is very tough on you, the id, which is your desires and your wish for gratification, and reality. And you can't satisfy all three at the same time. So good is when the three are in balance so that you can be productive, have relationships. And bad is when one or another of them is disregarded.
Can you not serve the three just because your id, your teeming, raging tempest of desire is just not in accord with the moral strictures of your superego, or because it's not in accord with reality? Or?
Yes, all of the above.
Okay.
And usually reality is the thing that defeats us. You can't have your loving relationship with your spouse and satisfy your sexual desire with everybody. You can't retaliate against your enemy or even your friend. You can't be too greedy and be too destructive and still have a world. So we have to tame all of these things, but if we tame them too much, then we're unhappy. If we don't tame them enough, then we bump into reality.
So then what are we to do about this? If he says this problem here is we really want to tame, in particular, our aggression, which he says derives from this very early prehistoric act of the children getting together and killing their father. Or he describes the Oedipus complex, or he describes all of these, I don't even know if I would say scientific ideas, mythical kinds of ideas.
Mythical is correct. And the whole idea about the primal horde and murdering the primal father, I have to say that that's pretty fanciful. I think it's more metaphorical than anything. It's the desire of the next generation to defeat the restraints of the previous generation, which, by the way, we see. Every generation is willing to burn the city down in order to defeat the then generation that's in charge.
You see this with the phrase "Okay, boomer."
Yeah,
this is just one.
That would be a mild
phrase,
example,
right?
Of it. Yeah,
right.
And so we want, and actually, you can look around in the world today. How much is there a desire to destroy the current structure of civilization just for the sheer joy of destroying it,
Yeah.
not with any necessarily good alternative to put in its place, and not with any awareness of the reality of what we would lose if we burned everything down.
Just that unrestrained death drive.
Unrestrained death drive. So I think that the primal father thing is his metaphorical way of representing that primal death drive. The need to clear the forest of all the traces of those who came before so that we can be unrestrained. But that is going to lead to doom.
When I read these metaphors, when I read Freud, and I think that point you made at the very top is so important, you've got to read him because he's different than you think he would be. He's
Yes.
different than, and when I open up this book, it doesn't read like a science textbook, to put it mildly. It reads like, I don't know, like not quite poetry, but he's such a good writer. And it reads like myth, and it reads like a little bit of philosophy, and it reads like, so then from your perspective, as a professor of a scientific field and a clinical practitioner, what gives? Is the man a scientist? Is it not scientific? Is he a poet? Is he what is he?
He's a moral philosopher who takes a psychological perspective on morality based on his experiences of the struggles of his patients in figuring out the right balance. So, is he scientific? He aspired to be scientific. Is he truly scientific in Karl Popper's sense of you have to have a hypothesis that you can disprove? No.
No.
No. But neither is philosophy, neither is any effort to explain human behavior. We can't. First of all, it would be immoral for us to conduct the experiments that might yield the answer, but I don't even think that they would yield the answer. So he's trying to use scientific reasoning and scientific principles and squeezing this into a scientific format. But is it science, like nuclear physics is science? No.
No. It's the only thing that irks me in his writing, which I generally find extremely captivating, is the pretentiousness of using a kind of scientific affect, when in fact he's doing something that seems to me much broader than that, and in many ways much deeper than that.
I agree with you on that. And I think that part of it is a pose to contrast it more with religion.
Right.
Religion is just faith and belief, and where I'm scientific
I'm Mr. Science.
And I'm going to give you at least he tries to expose internal self-contradictions within his thinking, which is, I think, more than some other branches of thinking do.
Now, since you are practicing and you're a faculty member at UCLA, how much does this guy matter today? And how much did he matter even at the time? I feel that sometimes people today don't fully appreciate just how significant this man was in his own time and for decades afterward.
Absolutely. He really introduced to the West and to the world the idea that a lot of what we do is not what we think the reasons are for doing it. And that along with whatever our professed thoughts are, there's a layer of unconscious motivation highly related to our childhood experiences and the reliving of those childhood experiences in various forms, which he called the transference neurosis, and that we are driven by these forces. So the whole idea that there's an underlying current of whether it's volcanic or whether it's a river, whether it's lava or water, or both, he introduced. And he introduced it through his clinical studies, and he introduced it through the interpretation of dreams. But the one that really was the thing that made it stick was his book, Jokes and the Relation to the Unconscious, in which he introduces the Freudian slip, and he's able to expose how jokes contain a lot of hostility, how the surface meaning of things is not necessarily the whole meaning of things. And so I think that he awoke Western civilization to this way of thinking, and we've taken it for granted, and now we don't think it's so special.
From the perspective of today, do you think that his claims about early childhood experiences, I'm being slightly glib here, but, wanting to kill your dad and shoot up your mother, these kinds of very, the ideas that we just associate in the popular consciousness with Freud, do they hold up? Are they still valid today, or no?
They are very unpopular today. We would not like to believe that we have so much aggression that's innate. We would like to believe that it's somebody else's fault. It's not really in me, but it's in society. And therefore, if we could change society, then I'd be okay. I don't have to change myself.
Right.
So he puts the locus of all of this in the individual. And that is an unpopular idea. He wants everybody to be taking responsibility for their own destructiveness and their own lust and their own desires and greediness and so on and so forth. Yes, those of us who work with patients know that the patterns and the template for how to live and what the world is like and how my mind works and how I process my emotions is laid down in the early years of life. And that still holds up. Whether the Oedipal situation is exactly the way he described it, I think I prefer to think of it more in the way that I described before. We all want to get rid of the older generation, get it out of the way so that we can be the ruler. So yes, I think that childhood, early childhood, as the twig is bent, so grows the tree.
I am not going to beat that. That is a terrific place to end. Not to end your reading, but to end this episode. We will see you next month, however. I'm Michael Knowles. This is the Book Club. Thank you so much for watching this episode of the Book Club on PragerU. PragerU is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, so we rely on donations from viewers like you to keep this content on the air. Please consider making a tax-deductible contribution today to help keep this content coming. Thank you very much.